Hello, thank you for joining us today. I have Zain Motani here from CleanKonnect. He is the founder of this company, who is one of our initial members of the NIL Verified Network, which we launched a couple weeks ago. Zain, how are you doing today?
Hey, Michelle, excited to be here. Excited to talk about the state of NIL and where it's going with you.
Yeah, and so Zain and I actually met now, what, a couple years ago, I think, in advance of all the wildness, in advance of the NCAA updating their bylaws to allow athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness. I want to say it was early 2021 when we first connected.
Yeah, just before July 2021.
Yeah, and so since this all went into effect, and now that we're almost actually 2 years into it, how have things been going from CleanKonnect side, your side, and just overall vision of this landscape?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question maybe from two perspectives. One about our general sports fan thoughts about the NIL landscape, and then two, strictly selfishly from a CleanKonnect perspective. I think now that we're 20 months into NIL, what's been exciting to see the landscape develop is there's more and more data coming out about deal sizes, how many collectives are popping up, and there's different legislation that I'm sure we'll get into that are kind of contradicting each other at times, from state laws to what the NCAA interim policy is. And I think that organized chaos creates excitement and opportunity to help come in and figure out simplification. So from a sports fan perspective, it's been cool to see NIL develop. And I've always been a personal believer that college athletes should be able to get paid, especially if they've amassed these huge social followings and have built those brands. And then from a CleanKonnect perspective, our model has gone through maybe one big evolution over the last 20 months. So when we first started the platform, when you and I first connected in spring of 2021, our platform was really meant to be a true platform that helps athletes and brands connect for influencer marketing deals. And that was very much what we did right from the very beginning. We worked with vitamin companies, clothing companies, hydration companies, and we had this network of athletes that we worked with and this network of brands we worked with, and we helped facilitate deals and hopefully made it much easier for the athlete and much easier for the brand. And as we were helping facilitate these anywhere from small to medium to quite large deals, we realized there's so much that we are learning about how NIL actually works, from how athletes are reaching out to brands, to what are the things that brands actually care about, to what are the most common questions that parents of these athletes have. So we decided, hey, can we take all that knowledge that we've experienced firsthand from these brand partnerships and put it in one clean spot to really help the parents of the student athlete, or to help the student who wants to work in sports one day understand here's everything that they need to know about NIL so that they can navigate the landscape safely and efficiently, whatever that means for them. Whether they just want to make sure their child isn't doing anything that's going to get them in trouble when completing NIL deals, or whether they aspire to be a sports agent one day and think that by having a robust understanding of NIL, that will differentiate themselves from differentiate them from their peers. So we went through this evolution right around July 2022. We built our CleanKonnect NIL certification course, and we've been heads down on that ever since.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a really interesting point about kind of the perception, the public, I guess, perception of NIL and what it really means, what we see in the national headlines versus what is happening on the ground floor for 99% of athletes. How can they go out and source those opportunities, find deals for themselves, build their brand in a way that is attractive for those types of endorsements and sponsorships? And I think that there is such a need for that education where they can understand everything outside of the headlines, which is what you guys have built at CleanKonnect with your course, which is fantastic. Yeah. And then also, I know we were talking right before we started recording here a little bit about the differences in state laws and how they're ever evolving and changing. How, I guess, and which ways have you kind of addressed that within your course? I know it's ever learning and changing, but yeah, that's a huge discrepancy across the country people need to be aware of as well.
Yeah, that's a big focus area, is as these state laws or this NCAA guidance evolves, how do we make sure we keep our course and our content updated, so folks know what the latest and greatest is? I think a good example of sort of the state law and NCAA guidance incongruence is back in October of 2022. The NCAA provided some clarifications for the interim NIL policy, and they basically provided a list of things that schools and athletes could do and they could not do. And one of the things they could not do was help facilitate brand deals for student athletes. That was pretty clear in their legalese. And then just last month in Florida, for example, the governor passed a new bill into law that is strictly designed to help the schools get more involved in facilitating brand deals for student athletes. And it provided guardrails and checkpoints for that. So it's, the October guidance from the NCAA is in direct contrast to what is now a state law in Florida. So our goal is not to necessarily comment on what's right and what's wrong, but rather just present the information to the audience member who's trying to understand, can I or can I not do this, to help them understand, here's what the NCAA guidance says, here's what the Florida state law says, without them having to read through a bunch of legalese necessarily, unless they do want to. But our goal and our objective with the course is to bring that all in one spot so folks can get educated and then they can make their own individual decision of how they want to proceed, given the information that they've collected.
Yeah, and I think that's super important because there's such a discrepancy across the whole country. Not only, NCAA interim policy keeps getting updated or additional guidance. We have a ton of state NIL laws, and then also all of the institutional policies. And I know, you and I have been following kind of the evolution of all of this over the past couple of years, but there's so many people who are kind of starting to, learn about this industry and go, gosh, this is a really exciting new space. And like, how can I get involved? I'm either a sports management student that, has been studying this, that now wants to work on NIL, or I've been working in sports for the past 20 years. I want to shift my career into this. And that's a lot to learn. I mean, you and I study it every day for the last 2.5 years. And now you're going, how can I get caught up on this? Very, very interesting.
And we're so early in the game. Someone much smarter than me, who I used to respect, who I respect a lot, would always say we're in the second inning of a 9-inning game if you're a baseball fan. And he would always articulate, this industry is so new and fresh, that you're at the very you're almost at the very beginning of a game that's still got 90% left to go before it's fully mature. And it sounds trite, but I feel that's where we are with NIL. If NIL is a 9-inning baseball game that has 27 outs for both teams, we're in the bottom of the first inning in terms of what's available to us, what tools and support are available for student athletes, what legislation is out there. It's only gonna evolve, and watching it develop from sort of the first pitch to where we are in the bottom of the first or top of the second or whatever point you want to use in the baseball game. It's been cool to see just how much it's evolved so quickly, and excited for just how much it could evolve in the future, hopefully making it better for student athletes, making it better for the schools as well. But just seeing that first inning evolution has been mind-blowing. I don't know if you do the same, Michelle, but every now and then I'll go back and look at emails that we had or messages that we were exchanging a year and a half ago, and it's fun, exciting, concerning all at the same time to see just how antiquated some of those thoughts or expectations were.
And so knowing what we know from the past couple of years, and if we were to wave our magic wand or our magic cap, looking forward, where do you see the opportunities really within this industry in terms of, I'm the sports management student that wants to get involved. Where are those kind of growth opportunities or pockets and ways for them to kind of pick this up?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound a little generic. This is going to sound a little generic, but I think just understanding that we're still all collectively so early in the NIL game that becoming an expert on the history of NIL, the data points of NIL, who the influencers are in NIL, what some of the pitfalls that folks have fallen into and why they've fallen into those pitfalls. So just a couple of weeks ago, the University of Miami had the first official NIL sanctions levied on them by the NCAA. So if you want to be involved in the NIL landscape in a meaningful way, whether you're a student athlete or not, I think just understanding the full history and what the pitfalls have been is what's going to set you up for success in the future, regardless of whether you want to become a sports agent or you want to become a general manager of a team. Understanding where folks have fallen short, not necessarily to deride them, but just to understand, okay, if I'm in that situation, in a comparable situation, here's how I make sure I make a different go forward decision, I think is what can help everyone differentiate themselves as much as possible. Again, regardless of their role, whether they're a parent of a student athlete that's in high school or a student athlete that's amassed a huge social media following and has one more year before they stop playing basketball or hang up their cleats or before their athletic career concludes, but they still want to figure out how do they make money and build their brand off of NIL.
Yeah, and I think something really interesting that I've seen on the kind of industry side, but also admin side, as these, like you said, we're just at the bottom of the first or the top of the second, depending on how you look at it. And there's a lot of NIL service providers that are growing in the space and hiring these positions. At university level, there's only 30 to 40 universities that have an NIL specific role. There's a lot more that have been posted. And, on this side, they really are looking to fill these roles with people who understand the landscape and really have that history, understand and can talk about it, whether to prospective clients or to athletes or whatnot. And they're struggling to fill those roles because it is so new. And, and then of course you see on the other side that there's a lot of people who are interested in this space. And so I think you're dead on that you have to kind of immerse yourself in it, learn the history and the pitfalls. And that's where you can really understand also where it's going and to be able to talk about it at a high level. And like you said, it's not even necessarily people who are in the space as much as even the parents of their athletes that want to help them, or the high school athletes that are looking up at this. There's so much need for education and understanding, where this started, why it happened, and where we're going with it.
And on the note of, you talked about the 30 to 40 roles that exist today, I think that is only going to continue to grow. And whether schools fill that with full-time employees or patch it together with contractors or just partner with software providers, like the Florida law that we were talking about earlier, it allows schools to be much more involved in student NIL athletic activities, but it also bumps up the requirement of what education and training that schools are required to provide, whether it's financial literacy or life skills. So schools are going to need to figure out one way or another how to invest the mind share, the dollars in supporting their student athletes so that they don't fall behind from a competitive recruiting advantage perspective.
Yeah. Shifting a little bit here, I would love to hear a little bit of your insights. If I were a high school athlete and I'm looking up at NIL, I plan to play in college and I haven't really done much in the space yet. What would your recommendations be if you had a top, 3 things in terms of how do I get started? Where would I go? What would I do?
Yep. So maybe the first thing I'd do is I would check to make sure that your state association does allow NIL at the high school level. So as of early March, there are less than 30 states in Washington, D.C. that do allow high school that do allow NIL at the high school level. And there's some pretty stern, for those 26, 27 states that do allow NIL, there's some pretty consistent guidance across the board. So of what is and is not allowed. So almost every single state explicitly says that the NIL deal cannot bleed into the athletic performance, meaning you can't promote a product or service wearing your school uniform. That's something that's consistent in pretty much every piece of state guidance. And also the executive director of the NFHS, who oversees all of high school athletics. There's almost 8 million athletes under her purview, Dr. Carissa Niehoff. She, for a year and a half, has been saying NIL can be good in certain pockets, but we don't want NIL to ever bleed into the locker room, or into the student athlete's jersey, or anything related to their day-to-day activities with their school team. So my first piece of guidance would be check the state association guidance to make sure that there is NIL allowed for your particular circumstance. And then the next piece of guidance would, if the answer is yes, dive deeper into what is and is not allowed. So some of the guidance is pretty cookie cutter across all states, but then there are states like Maryland, for example. Maryland's law for high schoolers says that high school athletes cannot do NIL deals to promote video games. And they also prohibit the formation of collectives by school employees. So these are things that athletes should be conscious of before they strategically look to partner with with brands that they truly, genuinely believe in. So that would be advice number 2. And then the third piece of advice I would offer, I think this applies to college students, but particularly to high school students, is if you are going to partner with brands for appearances or social media promotions, make sure that it's a brand that you genuinely believe in. If you're not going to genuinely believe in it, your audience is going to understand that, and your social performance likely isn't going to perform as well, which could be detrimental in the long run. So if you genuinely believe in a hydration company or a clothing brand, look to partner with them. But if it's a brand that is offering you money or free product, but you don't genuinely believe in them, and your followers your followers know you probably aren't the biggest fan of that brand, then strongly consider passing on that deal, or at least thinking through the implications of promoting that product or service if you don't necessarily believe in it, because the audience and the public will sniff it out at some point. So you just got to balance the trade-off of the potential reward versus the potential downside of that happening. So I would offer that advice to high school and college athletes, but particularly high school athletes who may be more apt to just jump at an NIL deal that presented itself and maybe don't have the same support around them that college athletes do.
Yeah, and I think that's huge in terms of the kind of authenticity of who you're partnering with, and if it aligns with not only who you are, but also who's your audience and community. Because I think that we've seen that in the first couple of years, and not always. Like, there's been some really cool and meaningful partnerships, but quite a few times as well, you see these college athletes that just kind of jumped at some deals, and you're going, do you even know what that product or service is?
Right.
Like, what were they offering on the other end that made you do that? And I think it is a turn off for your community, because it's kind of like the sellout kind of mentality almost of, I don't know. But yeah, very, very interesting. And would you say, I think at the high school level, if you're a little outside of, being that high profile athlete that's being approached by the Nikes of the world, where do you think the opportunities would lie for those athletes? Or even, actually, let's talk college too. Those college athletes that are outside of high profile, like, what would you recommend for them to kind of get started in the space, or even what do you think kind of opportunities are available to them?
Yeah, so if you're an athlete that doesn't necessarily have a huge social media following, or brands aren't sliding into your DMs looking for some sort of partnership, I think there's a couple of steps that you can take if you are interested in participating in NIL activities, which can be beneficial from a financial perspective, but then also just you understanding the business side of partnerships, which could pay dividends in years down the line. The first, I think, is define sort of who you are. What does your personal brand represent? What do you want people to think about or associate when they think of you? And make sure that your profile that you're putting out there, whether it's on social media or other platforms, reflects and conveys that. And then I think the next step is you can, I think a lot of athletes that we worked with, when we spoke with, expected a lot of brands to be sliding into their DMs because they had amassed decent social media followings. But there's a good contingent of athletes that have made a lot of money and really built a lot of positive notoriety around them from outreaching to brands. So figuring out who are the brands that you believe in, getting in touch with their partnerships director or sending them a direct message on Instagram, and taking it from a very professional approach. Do your research to figure out, has that brand partnered with professional athletes before? Have they partnered with other college athletes? Are there new products that that brand is looking to put out? And then share some information about yourself. What do you stand for? If you have insights into what your social media audience is, if your social media audience loves movies, then that could be a really interesting cohort for, or a really interesting target for you to outreach to brands to be able to say, hey, X% of my followers are interested in movies, or Y% are interested in fitness. What we found in talking with athletes and brands is those athletes who go to those brands with a well-prepared pitch of who they are and some data about them or their followers, those are the athletes that brands are excited to work with, because it conveys that the athlete has done their diligence, done their research, and is really interested in working with that brand rather than just trying to find a quick payday. So I think more at the high school level, it's going to be really important that you take the time to do that outreach and find the right brands and put together your story, because a lot of those brands are probably more focused right now on college athletes, rightfully so, because there's just a little bit more structure. It's a little bit more predictable for them at the college level than it is at the high school level.
Yeah, and I haven't thought about this in a while, but when you were talking about it, it almost reminded me of the whole recruiting process. Like when I worked at University of Hawaii coaching there, and I was in charge of recruiting, or was that first contact for recruiting, and I would get dozens and dozens of emails a day from, recruits across the country. And the ones that are personalized, and you can see that they've done their research, they know something about your program and who you are, you want to interact with those athletes. And I can imagine that sounded almost exactly the same on the brand side, where it's like, yes, you've done your research, you're being proactive, and you're actually telling and sharing your story, as opposed to just sending off this templated email to whoever reads it and opens it and playing really the numbers game, instead of being like, no, I want to work with you. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I think that as this continues to grow, we'll see more athletes becoming more confident and being proactive with that outreach. I know at least at San Diego State, it was, they weren't very confident in doing that yet, but yeah, very cool.
Were there maybe one or two, when you were in that recruiting role, maybe one or two letters that you still remember many years later, because the athlete just put so much effort into conveying their story, sharing their data, and talking about why Hawaii was the best fit for them?
I would say it was actually, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I think that it was the ones that were almost, we're in season, or beach volleyball seasons right now. And after every weekend, a recruit that really wanted to play at Hawaii, or maybe there's a couple, but would send off and be like, hey, congratulations on your win over this school or that. And, here's my latest video. I played in this tournament. I got third place. I played against these players who are committed to USC, Florida State, and just providing, and it's not doesn't have to be a huge long email. It's really just giving a snapshot, but making it customized and understanding our program and our kind of culture there. And then on the flip side, also sharing a bit about themselves and what they're up to, are the ones that kind of stuck out to me and really were impactful. Even if they weren't going to be eventual recruits at Hawaii, it was still I had relationships with them just because they were real people who, were vulnerable and put themselves out there and did their kind of due diligence. So yeah, I bet that it would actually resonate pretty well with athletes, just because they've all gone through that process once they go to college. In terms of think about it like your recruiting process.
That's a great comparison, because that's what the recruiting coordinator is the equivalent of the brand partnership coordinator. They want someone who can fit the bill for what they want their brand to represent, but then also someone who's going to be easy to work with and can plug and play into an ecosystem and have a good back and forth. Because that, just like when you're in that recruiting coordinator role, there were probably 10 plus athletes you were working on at any given point, and then that brand partnership coordinator, they're working with X number of other influencers at the same time. So you want to make sure that you are going to plug in easily and work well with that brand partnership coordinator, or whatever that appropriate title is.
Yeah, and I think that the last kind of shout out I would give to athletes is make sure that you're checking your dang emails and your communications after you reach out to brands, because they come back to you and are interested in talking, you don't get back for a few weeks, opportunity might be gone by then. And I know that emails are not the favorite of college students, but it's kind of how the the business world is still functioning. So
we surveyed our athletes a while back on what's your preferred method of communication when it comes to brand deals. And the number one response was Instagram DM. The second response was text message. And then the third mechanism was email. So it's a little bit foreign to the athletes to be managing it through email, but oftentimes the folks that they are working with on the other end would prefer email over going back and forth on an Instagram DM or a Twitter DM.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's wrap it up here, Zain. I'd love for you to share just, I don't know, 3 sentences more about what you're offering over at CleanKonnect, where anybody can find you, your social handles, all of that good stuff.
Yep. So at CleanKonnect, for the last almost year, we've been working on our NIL certification course, which is an immersive 3 to 4 hour course where you as a student athlete or a student who wants to work in sports or a parent of a student athlete can go through and get up to speed on everything that you need to know about NIL. So in our NIL course, we have 40 plus modules. These range from the history of NIL to the key data points that matter about NIL to what is the NIL legal legislation say today. And then we also have tools and tips for athletes. So we talked about brand outreach, when you're outreaching to a brand, what do you do? So we put together these templates that athletes can go through and still make them personalized, but hopefully help accelerate athletes when they're looking to work with these brands. So we've put that together in an online course. There's modules, there's text, there's video, there's audio snippets. Our goal is that if you're at a 50 out of 100 on the scale of understanding NIL, that after you go through the course, you can go from a 50 out of 100 to a 90 out of 100. Like that's our goal, is that you can really become close to an expert through our NIL certification course. At the end of the course, you will receive an actual NIL certification that you can use to differentiate yourself, whether you are applying for a job in the sports industry or you're a student athlete who is looking to work with a brand and you want to convey to that brand, I've done my diligence. I really understand how this NIL thing works. Here's my certification to prove it. So we're always modifying, updating the course as the NIL landscape develops. If you're interested in learning more about the course, you can check out our website, which is nilcertifications.cleankonnect.com, and CleanKonnect is spelled CleanKonnect.com. So nilcertifications.cleankonnect.com, and you'll be able to learn more about what our course is, who our target audience is, and what's included in the course.
And I'll also add on to that you guys have done a really nice job with kind of the quick text messages that you can sign up for just to get a snippet of NIL kind of weekly. You guys have been sending that out now for almost the past year, I want to say. And I know that I always appreciate getting those texts and seeing just the news of the week almost, which is a quick way just to stay up on the industry as it keeps developing.
Yeah, we do a weekly email newsletter, and we also do a weekly text message where the idea is if there's any new news or interesting data, you can receive it quickly via text and turn to your teammate or someone that's sitting next to you in your sports management class and share an interesting nugget about the NIL landscape without having to go through and Google and sift through Twitter to see what's going on.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Zain. Great convo as always. Love chatting with you about all things NIL.
No, I enjoyed this conversation, Michelle. Thank you for this conversation, and kudos to you for the NIL Verified Network. Excited to help to see how this verified network grows to help athletes figure out these are some reputable companies that are going about NIL the right way, regardless of what lane they're playing in NIL.
Awesome. Thank you.